So recently I just watched My Dinner with Andre for the first time. I ended up watching it multiple times this week. And there's one thing, overarching thing, that I think the movie is about, and it's why I've completely fallen in love with it. So to me, the biggest thing that this movie touches on is movement, or lack of movement. That's the key to everything. Andre is a character that has movement, right? He's talking a lot. He's afraid of silence. He runs from silence, so he talks. He's going to the Polish forest and having these experiences. He's doing all these other things, going around the world, to Israel, all these places, having experiences. He's moving. On the other side of it is Wallace Shawn, who's not moving. He's stagnant. He's not selling plays. He's depressed. Well, they're probably both depressed, but he's not experiencing the same type of movement. He embraces the silence. He lets Andre talk. He doesn't speak up because he's hiding behind it. Essentially, I think he's afraid to talk because he's kind of afraid of exposing himself and looking vulnerable, or maybe admitting defeat, or that he's stuck, or anything like that. So that's, to me, at the beginning, are these two characters who represent those two things, movement and a lack of movement. And one of the interesting things is how we learn about these characters in the beginning. So we'll take Wally, for example. In the beginning, we see him walking towards dinner, right? He's talking about his life, how he can't get plays sold, or can't get anybody to perform them. He's talking about how when he was 36, all he thought about was art and music, and now all he thinks about is money. And there's one particular moment where he references going to the mailbox and seeing a stack of bills, and he says, "How was I supposed to pay them? I'm already doing my best." That's like a direct quote, and it's such a beautifully innocent way of looking at the world. You get insight into how he thinks and how he's moving, which is, walking is moving, but compared to the other forms of transit, as I'll explain later in the arc, it's not moving very fast. One of the really interesting things that happens is when he says all he thinks about is money, it directly cuts to him on the subway, and he literally gets blown back by the wind and the power of it. To me, that's a very important visual marker of him interacting with a world that's moving. He's not used to it, and he's literally getting blown back by it. I thought it was a pretty interesting choice. I assume by Louis Malle, but it was pretty powerful because you get the visual idea of who this character is at the beginning. Andre, on the other hand, we see where he's at the beginning through a story that Wally tells, which is he's having dinner with this guy that he's been avoiding, even though they used to be close friends, because the friend who asked him to have dinner with him said he saw Andre in a weird part of town sobbing against a wall. And the reason he was sobbing was because he had just seen a Bergman film, and the line that he referenced for his being upset was, "I can always live in my art, but I can never live in my life." And that's his mindset. He's having some sort of midlife crisis. He's running from silence. He's trying to talk his way through it. And as you watch, he's talking constantly at the beginning. I mean constantly, because he's afraid to slow down. He doesn't know what's going to happen if he stops talking, if he stops moving. Okay, so one of the interesting things about making films is that in studying them and making them, you learn that everything matters. Everything that's in the frame has been thought about. It's there for a reason. So I like to probably read too much into things, but one of the things that I thought was fascinating about the conversation, the dinner, once we've established the beginning, is the set design, the things that are around them. And one of the things, if you look, is there's a mirror behind them, and it has an interesting frame around it. In particular, there's a circle and a square around it. Now, to me, the circle, and I'll just reference one place that I had this idea thrown at me, which was the book Lame Deer, Seeker of Visions, where they talk about how the circle is a fluid thing. It represents movement, right? And it's found in nature, whereas the square is not. There's nothing square that's natural. Human beings make things that are square. I mean, think about the things in our lives that are square. Money's square, our walls are square, our houses are square, our screens are square, the movie screens are square, our credit cards are square, everything's square, not in nature. And so in this design of this mirror, there's a circle with the square around it. So to me, that felt like a perfect symbol of movement being encased or caged around this artificial square thing, that there's a lack of harmony there being said about the characters. And as you go through the movie, the background kind of darkens. So in the beginning, it's kind of prominent, but by the end, even though the restaurant's closing and they probably turned off lights, it fades into the background as their conversation happens and they start to open up. I thought it was really fascinating. The other thing that was really interesting was if you look behind each character, it mirrors what they're experiencing or what they're going through. So for example, behind Andre, you notice that there's like a waiter station behind him. There's constant waiters coming and going and grabbing water or whatever. You can see the bartender in the distance. He's moving back and forth. Patrons are walking back and forth. So that mirrors his movement and his talking and his constant storytelling. But as you go to the left of him, behind Wally, you get a wall. And it's just stillness. You know, that wall is there for a reason. It's still. You wouldn't have it the opposite way, would you? It's interesting to watch the background of each, because they tell you what the character is going through. And by the time you get over to Wallace Shawn, there's a really interesting thing that's happening. There's a mirror there, and you see people sitting in the restaurant. So the difference there is stark. Behind Andrea's movement and behind Wally is a wall and a mirror that's showing people sitting. So if we go back to the theme at the beginning about movement and how Wallace Shawn is walking to dinner, he's taking the subway, there's something really interesting about his arc in particular, which is as they go through the conversation, both characters start to open up, right? They start talking about different things in their life. Wally starts to open up, Andre starts to listen more, and there's this balance, this harmony that sort of happens in the middle of the conversation. And by the end of it, they're changed. You can tell, right? What happens is that Andre decides to pay for dinner. Because Wallace Shawn went to dinner with him, he's got this dinner, wine, everything at this expensive restaurant. He seems to be very thankful about it. And what he says at the end is that he treats himself to a cab on the way home, which is, you imply that it's a treat, so he doesn't do it that often, and he goes through this process of, hey, I'm going to, subconsciously maybe, enjoy movement here. And it's different than walking, right, because it's walking slow, and it's different than the subway because it's moving fast. But what's interesting is that the cab is like some sort of in-between. It's like perfect for him. It's more movement than he's used to, but it's not quite as stressful and light speed as the subway system and all that. So he's in this cab, experiencing movement, more movement. He treats himself to the cab, he says, because he wants more movement after this conversation. I think that's what's going on. And what's interesting is that we see him looking out of the cab on the way home, and we get shots of the city moving block after block. So it's like we're looking out the cab as well. And he's remembering all these things about his childhood, standing on this block when he's 10, or getting ice cream after school on this other block. And the movie ends with just the shots of the streets and the blocks going by. To me, that is a brilliant, shot or idea or concept or sequence of shots for the director to put in there, because it's about movement. So you have a character who wasn't moving, he feels stagnant, he goes through this conversation, he's transformed, at least initially, and he's embracing movement by the end, and you see it through the shots. One more interesting thing that happens in this movie, and I heard Andre talk about this in an interview with Noah Baumbach, who did a documentary with talking with Andre and Wallace Shawn about the film. And Andre mentioned that one of the brilliant things about the film that nobody ever talked about was how the film lets you imagine the scenarios, right? It doesn't do what a typical movie does, which is he talks about going to the Polish forest, and then all of a sudden you're in the Polish forest, or at least there's maybe a flashback, or like there's some sort of transition, right? We go back through time and we see them in these physical places, in Israel, in Poland, in wherever. They don't do that. It's a conversation. You stay at the table the whole time, which is super fascinating to me. I love that kind of stuff. They're letting the conversation happen and continue so that you can imagine it yourself. Does that make sense? I don't think I'm explaining that in the best way possible, but it's letting you have your imagination run wild, which is what I love about the movie. It doesn't have to show it to you. You have to imagine. You have to take yourself to the Polish forest. You have to take yourself to Israel or wherever he goes, Tibet. You're the one who's responsible. You're listening to a conversation. And that's, I think, maybe one of the most interesting things that I've heard about this film. And the other interesting thing is that, it's two people sitting at a table talking for 2 hours, basically. And I've had a lot of friends say to me, it's interesting that you brought up this movie because I've heard lots of people referencing it and talking about it. Maybe it's on the front pages of different streaming services. I don't know. But one thing that struck me is that I wonder if the reason it's resonating right now is because it's essentially a podcast. It's two people sitting at a table. Our dinner with Andre is what you could call it. And he invites Andre on. They have a conversation for 2 hours. That's happening all the time now. It was, I think, groundbreaking when it came out because it was a movie about just people sitting and talking, and you had to imagine these places. But now, in 2026, when I'm doing this video, it's very common to sit and watch people. I mean, how many times have you sat on YouTube and watched someone or two people talk for hours? It happens all the time. So I thought that was an interesting sort of, I don't know what you call that, like a before its time, where they're sitting down and going through this. And I wonder what the reviews were like when it came out, if it criticized the lack of movement into different scenes. But it totally fits today. So there's two interesting things that happen that are kind of a digression from what I'm talking about, which is the cutaway shots, the reaction shots of Wallace Shawn are priceless. I laugh every time I come up and see him because he just looks like, like a balding child who's so fascinated by the world listening to this guy talk. He's just so innocent and I don't know, just something charming about it. The other thing is that in the conversation towards the end, Wallace Shawn does say the word inconceivable. Look it up. Bring up the tape. Okay, so those are my thoughts about My Dinner with Andre. Let me know what you think. That's the whole point of this channel, is that we get into a conversation. We'll converse. If you comment, I will respond. That's the whole point of this channel, is to have these discussions. I'd love to know what your take is. If you haven't seen it, will you see it? I hope I didn't ruin this for you. But if you have seen it and you have thoughts on it, or you have a different take, or you have a take on what my take was, let's talk about it. Put it below. And remember to join Movie Club on Patreon if you can. It's where I send out DVDs each month to one raffle winner. You join Patreon, I put all the names into a bowl. End of the month I pull one out and I send you surprise DVDs. Movie Club and My Dinner with Andre.